having a contingency plan, armed forces coming in to blitz with vaccinations and provide that support, testing as well. This is what we need to be prepared to do.
So would you all agree with what Simon suggested? Well, Tobias, you obviously do. Yasmin, Rebecca, do you think that it's got to such a state now, not just in Bolton, but plenty of other areas as well, where surge vaccination should happen in all of those areas, and if necessary, get the army involved? Yasmin, would you agree with that?
Well, they did a very good job building the Nightingale Hospital, which were never used properly, but we won't go back there. Yes, all resources, but I still don't understand this. You're not, unless you stop people coming in from other areas and test them relentlessly, are we going to have border checks between Bolton and Birmingham, for example? This is a very difficult one. So vaccination is certainly a very big part of the solution. It's the mobility thing about the movement. If there are differentials in the areas which are totally vaccinated and those that are not yet, especially the younger populations. So it's not easy. And as I said earlier, I do feel for the government, but there have been too many cock-ups.
I'm just imagining that border wall between Bolton and Birmingham. That would almost be of Trumpian length. Rebecca?
No, I completely agree with what's been said. As I said earlier on, I think that the way forward, certainly one aspect of the government strategy should be surge vaccination across regions. Now, that isn't the answer to everything, as Yasmin has said. It doesn't stop people from travelling to get to work, to go and visit family, etc. And that's why we need to fix the test system, which has been broken pretty much since the start. I don't know who gets messages on their app anymore. I certainly don't. So that must be addressed. And of course, I think the government should be urging caution on everybody across the UK, that whilst it's great that we can relax some of the rules and see our loved ones again, we've still got to be cautious. Our schools still need to be properly ventilated, and we need to adopt those social distancing principles. Workplaces the same. And I just worry that the government has got a little bit too happy with relaxing the regulations and not got its messaging right. We're at a crucial phase now, and unless we're really, really cautious, we could be heading into another catastrophe.
Tobias, you wanted another quick word?
Well, let's just deal with the Nightingales, because it's all very well to look back and dismiss it, to say that they weren't used. But could anybody predict the speed in which this virus moved from China all the way across the world? We genuinely didn't know what was going to happen when it hit the UK, to the extent to which the NHS could have been deluged. And it was absolutely right for us to then protect the NHS, to make those preparations. Thankfully, they weren't required. But to turn around and say, what a waste of time now, imagine it being reversed. Imagine if we said, no, we didn't need the Nightingales, let's not bother. And in fact, it had ripped through our communities in a way, and we wouldn't have been able to manage. That would have been a massive criticism of the government. So, the government cannot be criticised for making sure that we have our backs covered there.
I'm not quite sure Yasmin said it was a waste of time. Yasmin?
No, I didn't say that. I said that, they built these magnificent hospitals which weren't used. And I don't think, Tobias, you can be quite so sanguine. In those early months, really big mistakes were made in this country compared to many others. Of course, this is a virus that is unpredictable, shockingly efficient in the way it travels and gets, changes its shape and so on. But those early mistakes cost us a lot. Not closing the borders, and we've done it again with India. Actually, not, and the testing systems were so badly handled.
Okay, we haven't got time to go back into. We haven't got, well, I'm sure they will be with Mr. Cummings before the select committee, but we haven't got time to go into all of those mistakes right now. But Cliff, in Bolton, I'm sure you'd like to come back on what you've just heard.
Yeah, in Bolton and Greater Manchester, we've been in some kind of lockdown for 15 months. 15 months we've had some kind of lockdown. And now, Rebecca Long-Bailey is saying we've got to be very careful. We must look at social distancing and take everything step by step. I've been vaccinated twice. Okay? So, according to the government and the scientists, A, I won't get it, and B, I won't pass it on. What on earth are we still talking about? We've got to be cautious and take it easy. You know, it seems to be that the government are using every excuse to say, let's put it back a bit. Oh, the people in Bolton, they've got the Indian variant. Oh, well, we'll stop them moving. You know, how can they justify it? I haven't got a problem at all with people saying, I don't want the vaccine. That's their prerogative. But at the other hand, if we're all in this together, somewhere someone's got to take a bit of responsibility.
Okay. Cliff, thank you very much for your call, your first time call. You're very welcome on the programme. Hope to hear from you again in the future. If you'd like to put a question to the panel, 0345 6060 973. It's 19 minutes past 8.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:22. Let's go to Shaji in Sutton for our next question. Hi, Shaji.
Hi, Iain. Good evening. Good evening, panel.
Good evening. What would you like to ask?
My question is the Islamophobia issue in the Conservative Party is treated as seriously as the anti-Semitic issue in the Labour Party by media, politicians and the public?
That's a really good question. Simon Heffer.
Well, I don't want to intrude into the private grief of either the Conservative Party or the Labour Party, but I don't know, and I generally don't know, whether anti-Islamic feeling in the Conservative Party is quite as obviously bad as anti-Semitic feeling was in the Labour Party. I mean, I still remember that horrific spectacle 2 or 3 years ago of Luciana Berger having to have a bodyguard at the Labour Party conference because she was fearing her personal safety just because she was Jewish. And I can't think of anything as bad as that happening in the Conservative Party. So there were egregious instances of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, or certainly the fear of anti-Semitism. As I understand it, the report that has been made is an independent report, and they've said that while the party nationally isn't institutionally racist, and that would appear to be true, there are people of the Islamic faith in the government. There are, they say, instances of it at local levels and among individuals. Unfortunately, in any society, you're going to have people who have unpleasant, unreconstructed views about all sorts of things. And so it can be no surprise that there are people in the Conservative Party who have decided they don't like Muslims, just as there are obviously people in the Labour Party who have decided they don't like Jews. What one does about that, short of booting them out the minute that they express one of these vile opinions, I don't know. In fact, I think probably booting them out of the party is the only thing that they can do. But certainly if there is in constituency parties examples of Islamophobia, then they must be stopped. It's not in the Conservative Party's interest to alienate the Islamic community in this country. I would have thought actually that most Muslims in this country, given their strong belief in family values, their strong belief in enterprise as well, as some brilliantly successful Muslim businessmen in this country, and women, are natural fodder for the Conservative Party, and it would be very stupid of the Conservative Party to do anything to alienate them. But I simply don't, if there's going to be a contest between which of the two parties is the more racist in different ways, I simply don't know how you answer that question.
Do you think the media cover this equally? In that, obviously, when there was all these accusations about Jeremy Corbyn's leadership and all the rest of it, which, I mean, I can remember doing loads and loads of phone-ins on those. I also did quite a few phone-ins on Islamophobia in the Conservative Party, but no one ever remembered those for whatever reason. Do you think the media coverage is balanced?
Well, Corbyn, while he continued to say repeatedly that he was not an anti-Semite, there would then be a story in the newspaper the next day of him appearing on a platform with some notorious anti-Semite or people who had expressed really very unpleasant views about Jewish people. I'm not aware of Boris Johnson, and I don't have any brief for him at all. I'm not aware that he's ever appeared on a platform with a noted anti-Islamic person or an Islamophobe. Again, I think it was much more above the radar in the Labour Party, which is why the media decided to report it, than it is in the Conservative Party.
Yasmin, I'm sure you have some views on this. Do you think the media coverage has been balanced on these two issues?
No, it hasn't. I find it quite dispiriting to pit one set of injustices against another and make it into a competition. No injustice based on ethnicity, race, religion, indeed gender and class is acceptable in a good democracy, and we should all be concerned to help make sure that a child born into a family of whatever background has an equal chance and feels a part of this nation. Surely it's in all of our interests. I don't think the degree of anti-Muslim feeling and also anti-Black feeling in the Tory party has been addressed adequately by the media. And the issue of anti-Semitism which was a good thing. I've always known Baroness Warsi, and, for a while I couldn't understand why she was even in the Tory party. And I take guidance from her. And it's when she says the stuff that she knows goes on in the Conservative Party that I wish people had listened to a long time ago. I think this report has done the right thing because it says we accept the findings, and here is when we will try, for this particular problem, this will be solved by whatever date. I haven't read the report, which I think is a very good thing.
they have said that they're accepting all of the recommendations, and in 6 weeks' time they will issue a document that it explains how they will address all of the conclusions.
And I think that's a very good thing. It's a
completely
different approach.
Saida Vasi today has said that she says the report is wrong, that she believes the party is institutionally Islamophobic or racist. I'm not quite sure which term she used.
Sorry, that's the one issue where I think there is going to be argument about what do we mean by institutional racism or Islamophobia. And it was that dreadful other report, which was the sticking point, the same sticking point, that there are levels of systemic prejudices and bigotry and exclusion in this country. We're a good deal better than we were. I think Black Lives Matter actually astonishingly has changed the business world far more than the political world, which is a fantastic thing. Businesses and the arts organization, NGOs have really woken up to this. And like I said, I never felt that one discrimination mattered more than another. For as long as there are groups who are treated with contempt and just prejudices, the country cannot flourish. So I think it's a good report from what I gather. A lot of my Muslim friends seem to think it's a right step in the right direction. We'll see.
Tobias Ellwood.
Thank you. And it's an important question to raise. And I'm glad we're discussing it this evening. I'm pleased that Professor Swaran Singh's report, his independent review, has been published. But I very much also welcome Amanda Milling, the co-chair of the party's acceptance of all 27 recommendations. I partially agree with both Yasmin and I think totally with Simon there. Politics and power, as you know, Iain, attracts all sorts of characters who want to be, part of what's going on or influence the political debate. It is inherent on the party leadership, regardless which party it is, where you are in the spectrum, to recognise when any form of faith is not understood and it's twisted and messages are poisoned, and that affects the debate and indeed the reputation of the very party that these people purport to be part of. We need to work harder at this. I was the Middle East minister for a number of years, and in speaking about Islam, not just in the Middle East, but also in Britain as well, often when you hear these bigoted views, it's based on complete ignorance and misunderstanding, fueled, I'm afraid, also by military engagements in both Afghanistan and Iraq and the advent of 9/11. I'm glad this report has come out, but absolutely there's action to be done here.
Can I just come in on that? I want to make one point, that one of the things I've never believed in is that we Muslims are beyond criticism. There's a lot that's wrong within our families, our communities, like many other families and communities. But what's happened is that instead of focusing on stuff we deserve to be criticized on in order that we can get some reform in, it's been the unfair stuff. I mean, the stuff I get on social media, that you don't have the right to be here. That's wrong. And I really hope that these recommendations are followed through.
Rebecca Long-Bailey, I hesitate to bring this up, but you were sacked by Keir Starmer from the front bench over an allegedly anti-Semitic tweet. Your party has gone through the last 5 or 6 years with this problem of anti-Semitism. Are there any things that you think that the Conservative Party can learn from the experience of the Labour Party over the last 6 years, so this problem doesn't become worse than it already is?
Look, I retweeted an interview in The Independent, and I apologise for that. I should have read it and understood and noted the sentence within there that wasn't correct and was offensive and caused great upset to a lot of people. And I've apologised for that. And I think it serves as a reminder, really, that we've all got a really robust legal and moral duty as politicians, political parties and the media to fight against racism. We've got to take it very, very seriously. And the report that certainly we've seen today was very worrying. The Prime Minister, the Conservative Party have got to acknowledge, and it sounds as though they've taken a few tentative steps in doing this, but they've got to acknowledge the pain and the hurt that's been caused within the Muslim community, as well as taking meaningful action to rebuild trust and ensure that they've got party processes and an education programme for their members. I think it's also important to note that the actions of the leader, the Prime Minister himself, can't be taken away from this. And he's got to accept that some of his historic language has been very offensive to Muslim people. And I'd like to see him apologise for that. But this is a very important issue, and I don't think it's restricted to one particular political party or one particular media establishment. The UK cannot tolerate any form of racism. We've seen hate crime increase in recent years, anti-Semitic hate crime, Islamophobia, and we've got a duty as public figures to make sure that the message that we send out is that we don't tolerate it here.
Do you think if a Conservative cabinet minister had retweeted a tweet like you did, that Boris Johnson would immediately act and do what Keir Starmer did?
Well, it was quite a terrible experience. I was mortified when I got the call to tell me that you've retweeted something here and it's got inappropriate sentences within it. And I wanted to sort it out. I put all of this in an article to try and explain to people what happened, because the last thing I ever wanted people to think was that I would condone any anti-Semitic sentences or tropes, because that certainly would not have been something I would have wanted to do, given the work that we were trying to do to rebuild trust within the Labour Party. I put out a tweet that was drafted by the leader's office. Sometime later, I was told that tweet wasn't appropriate, and I asked to put out a press statement explaining why I was going to remove the tweet and why that sentence in the article was wrong. And that was denied. And then I asked to speak to Keir, and then the rest, unfortunately, is history, as they say. But we learn from these experiences. My actions weren't right, and I could have handled it better, in the same way that I'm sure the leadership team could have handled it better. But the message that we take from the whole incident is that no political party can tolerate anything that's racist, homophobic, discriminatory or anti-Semitic. And our actions as public figures need to demonstrate that we have zero tolerance for that.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Let's go back to Shaji in Sutton. Do you think the media and politicians treat anti-Semitism and Islamophobia the same?
No. I'm really upset. Jeremy and Labour Party was treated very harshly by the media and by politicians. I mean, I listened to your radio station, and I remember in your afternoon slot, every day, 1 hour was spent to hunt down Jeremy. I was
not
very,
true.
very upset. It's true. I even called the presenter and told her.
Oh, I thought you were talking about me.
No, not you. No. It's afternoon slot, 1 to 3 slot.
Okay, all right. Well,
yeah.
Sheila is big enough to speak up for herself, but it certainly wasn't every day. Shaji, thank you very much. Right, we're going to come back to more of your calls in a moment. You can still get on if you phone 0345 6060 973. Very late to the news with Serena Farrow.
Guidance for 8 parts of England with high levels of the India variant of coronavirus is to be updated. Ministers want to make it clear that the areas aren't under local lockdowns. The Conservative co-chair says they'll accept all recommendations made by an independent review into discrimination in the party. It found there was no institutional anti-Muslim sentiment, but there are issues at local association and individual levels. And events have been taking place around the world to mark the murder of George Floyd by a police officer in Minneapolis a year ago. Policies across several sectors have changed since his death, with calls for further changes. LBC weather, showers dying out in most places tonight, though some persisting, a low of 4 degrees.
LBC.
I want to
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
Tobias, Ellwood, Rebecca Long-Bailey, Simon Heffer and Yasmin Alibhai-Brown with me to answer your questions. Angela is the next caller. She's in Brixton. Hello, Angela.
Hello, good evening.
Hi.
My question is, what are the police doing to fix the bad relations between the young black youths across the board in general in Britain?
Rebecca Long-Bailey, let's come to you first.
Well, it's quite a poignant day today as we're talking about the George Floyd case. And certainly in the UK, I think that case brought to the fore racial injustices that were being faced by people from the BAME community right across the UK. And we've got to ensure that change happens now. But unfortunately, we've got a system that at the moment is stacked against many people. There was an important report that was put out by the Runnymede Trust in Manchester University recently that showed that over 50 years after race relations legislation was passed, ethnic minorities in Britain continue to experience extensive inequalities in education, employment, housing, health, and also justice, unfortunately. And we've got pieces of legislation that the government are trying to pass at the moment that seek to exacerbate the situation even further. So the police bill, for example, is making its way through Parliament at the moment, has things called violence reduction orders referred to within it that will particularly target BAME communities quite significantly. There are other elements of that bill that target other ethnic groups, such as travellers. The bill tries to essentially criminalise the way of life for the traveller community. So we seem to be going backwards instead of forwards in addressing the huge issues that we're facing. And I think if the government takes anything from what's happened over the last 12 months, the Black Lives Matter protest, it has to set out a real strategy on tackling this racial inequality that we see across the UK, across all institutions.
Yasmin, the question is particularly about how can relations between the police and young black people be fixed. This is not something new. This has been going on for decades, and yet very little seems to have changed. Why do you think that is, and what can be done about it?
Well, again, this goes back to what I said earlier, that there are so many groups who are facing very particular problems. But I think for young black men and boys in particular, and by black, I mean of African heritage, Afro-Caribbeans, Africans, the kind of violent racism that they experience from really a very young age, from the police in particular, I think that's something we haven't addressed. It is astonishing to me that Cressida Dick has been denying institutional racism. And yet I was just looking back at how many police officers have ever been charged, tried, and, properly punished for treating black males in particular in unacceptable ways. And I think the answer is almost zero. So there is a huge protective net around the police forces. And we have had scandalous numbers of black men in particular, facing terrible treatment from our beloved police officers. I'm not saying all police officers. There are certainly some police officers who have for decades been, one of my closest friends. There was a film about him the other day on the BBC made about what the police did to him for 25 years. And he was Frank Critchlow. He lived in Notting Hill Gate. The police persecuted him, a really decent man, broke him. When he died, he was a broken man. And they even paid him for persecuting him, but they broke him. So this is an issue our country has yet not addressed.
So what should be done? I mean, we've obviously only got a very short time to explore this, but can you just give me one thing that you would like the police to do that would signify meaningful change?
Whenever there is a case of a death in custody, of really unprofessional, immoral, illegal acts committed against people arrested and charged, stop and search, those officers immediately have to face some kind of action. What's happening is that they just either retired, the thing drags on and nobody ever gets punished for it. And, you've had cases recently, even in this year, this emotional year, of an athlete with a 6-month-old baby being stopped for no reason, but except that she and her husband and baby had a nice car. And so they were drug dealers, according to these officers. Right. Not acceptable.
Simon Heffer.
Well, I certainly don't agree with black people or anybody being stopped because they've got a nice car. But I think we have to agree that there's a quantum leap from that to a policeman kneeling on a man's throat for 9 minutes until he dies. And I've got no particular brief for the police, but the police have reformed considerably in my lifetime. I mean, those of us who can remember, and I'm sure Yasmin can, the days of the Special Patrol Group going around Brixton in the late 1970s and early 1980s, the Brixton riots, and all those riots in the early 1980s in predominantly black communities in some of our inner cities, Bristol, Birmingham as well. Things were obviously completely toxic between the police and young black males in those days. And I think certainly the Stephen Lawrence case and the Macpherson report and the charge against the police that they were institutionally racist did have a profound effect on how the police manage themselves and how they see themselves. And if there were a chief constable on this phone-in, and I know several chief constables of recent times, the training that they go through and the example they are expected to set to their officers about how to treat everybody equally is nothing like that existed 20, 25 years ago. So the police, I think, have changed. What can the police do to be better? The police have to say to themselves every day that everybody that they encounter, irrespective of race, colour, creed, gender, whatever, gets the same treatment. And that's got to be dignified, straightforward treatment. And Cressida Dick appears to have been trying to do that. I mean, obviously there are egregious mistakes. In fact, nothing has, I thought, been more offensive that the police have done than the wrestling to the ground of an entirely harmless woman in a demonstration in London a couple of months ago. That sort of thing, I think, is entirely unacceptable. So it isn't just black people who suffer from this, but the police have got to be told that their job is to catch criminals and enforce the law. And they're not out there as some sort of social engineering squad to have their own prejudices and to impose them on others. They've got to treat everyone equally. And we must have a police force where obviously they recruit from ethnic minorities, which they, I think, now do very well, again, compared with 20 or 30 years ago when there were very few black and Asian people in police uniforms. But they've also got to say to all those officers, you treat everybody the same and you'll be punished and thrown out of the force if you don't.
Simon, can I just come in very quickly? I think Simon is right. There was a sea change after the Macpherson report. But sadly, we've kind of gone back, as Doreen Lawrence herself pointed out recently.
Tobias, I'm going to ask you to be relatively brief here because I want to fit in one more question before the end, but I'll give you a bit longer in that one.
Just an experience I had in going to the National Museum of African American History. I had to go to the Mall in Washington, D.C. to understand the British history, the fact that we moved 3 million people from one side of the Atlantic to the other, the largest forced migration in human history. We don't understand our own history. And until we start to do that, then it's going to be difficult to deal with some of the more practical day-to-day challenges. I would encourage everybody to visit that museum. I believe we need to have a museum such as that of our own history in the UK. Should that be in the curriculum? Because it isn't at the moment, is it? Absolutely. If you don't understand your past, this is why it happened in Bournemouth and other places where statues were suddenly brought down, because people then reviewed what happened with an individual that was to Francis Drake, who was paraded as being a bit of a hero, and then suddenly you realise what their background was, and then you look at them in a different light. Now, we can't delete our history; we must learn from it.
Well, I think I've fallen in love with you, Tobias.
Oh my goodness me, Simon Heffer, you're the historian here. Do you agree with that? Do you think this should be on the national curriculum?
I think it's a quite legitimate thing to teach on the national curriculum, provided you also teach the whole story, which was that many of the unfortunate people who were transported across the Atlantic were sold into slavery by other black people who ran tribes or nations that had conquered the tribes or nations that were being sold into slavery. So it wasn't just white men turning up and rounding up black people in Africa and putting them on ships and taking them abroad. They were doing a business deal on which they made a profit with local people in Africa, and that, I'm afraid, is very rarely said. So teach that as well. Teach the whole story.
Well, you heard it here first. Yasmin Alibhai-Brown in love with a Conservative MP. The things this programme discovers. It's 8:52.
This is LBC. Welcome. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Right, let's go to our final question from a caller. It's Chris in Kingsclear. Chris, what would you like to ask? Hi.
Good evening, Ian. Thank you for bringing me on and let me ask a question. My question is following. In regarding to the testimony tomorrow, Dominic Cummings, to your panel, who is more trustworthy, Boris Johnson or Dominic Cummings, and why?
Tobias Ellwood.
Well, it's the big event tomorrow that everybody is going to be, I think, tuned into. There's no doubt that Dominic Cummings is, I think, an impressive strategist when it comes to winning elections and campaigns. He did that with Brexit and indeed with the 2019 election. But, he is a divisive character. He wants to do things his way. And the collective unity of cabinet, I'm afraid, went out the window with his arrival. It was a very different atmosphere under his watch. And many people predicted that it was probably going to end in tears. People like him are helpful because it's good to have people, that throw pebbles in the pond and stir things up a bit, make you think differently in a more lateral way. But ultimately, the responsibility, the coordination, the construct of government must absolutely work. Big, chunky departments must be allowed to advance with ingenuity, with flair, with leadership. And that, I'm afraid, didn't happen under his watch.
And the answer to the question?
I don't think it's a fair question as such. They're both very, very different characters. The Prime Minister is in situ now. He's advanced. He's got a much more adult, grown-up leadership team around him now. Dominic Cummings served the purpose of, as I mentioned, 2 big events that were successful for the Conservative Party. That's allowed Boris Johnson to remain in power, and he could be there for an awful long time now, depending on how we move forward.
I find it quite astonishing that a Conservative MP can't answer that question by saying, yes, of course, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is the most trustworthy.
No, of course, from that perspective, I'm going to say the Prime Minister in that.
Yeah, but you didn't.
I think the question itself is designed to be controversial and is designed to be inflammatory in that way. Every leader that you come into office, you'd hope, comes in there with the best of intentions and is trustworthy as well. But to say Dominic Cummings is not trustworthy too, I'm not sure that's the right question to be answered. If I'm frank to Chris, I appreciate why he asked the question.
It's the question that our listener wants the answer to.
It is. But it goes back to the original question that we had, earlier about comparing the Jewish challenge and the Islamic challenge with their parties themselves. That's the competition between the two is not the issue.
Simon Heffer, regular listeners to this programme will know of your adoration and love for Boris Johnson, so I'm imagining that you're going to say Dominic Cummings.
Well, Mr. Ellwood said they're 2 very different characters, and they certainly are. One is a pathological liar and one isn't.
Do you wish to elucidate? Well, it answers it for me, but for our listeners.
Well, I mean, I just compare Johnson saying, for example, a few years ago, and this is one of his very minor lies, I will lie down in front of the bulldozer if they start to build another runway at Heathrow Airport. And I think he had to go to Afghanistan on a bogus mission in order to get out of voting on that when he was Foreign Secretary. And compare that with the obviously great difficulties that Dominic Cummings had in that ludicrous press conference in the Garden in Downing Street a year ago, when he tried to explain why he'd had to go to Barnard Castle to get his eyes tested, or whatever it was. I mean, he was clearly lying, but he was obviously an amateur. He was obviously not a professional liar in the way that Johnson is. It's like the old Richard Nixon joke. If Nixon ever found himself telling the truth by accident, he'd start lying again to keep his hand in. And Johnson does it as a matter of course. Cummings, I suspect, doesn't do it very easily. And I'm prepared to believe everything Dominic Cummings says tomorrow.
I think you want to, don't you? Yasmin?
No, it's not a question that I want to. It's a question that I will, because I don't think he's a fundamentally dishonest person.
All right, Yasmin.
I'm sorry, Bolton. I wouldn't trust either of them. I think Cummings is like Blofeld, the Bond villain. I think he's there's something quite psychopathic about him, and Simon is absolutely right. Johnson wouldn't recognise the truth if it kissed him on the lips. So they deserve each other, and I'm loving the fallout. I'm really loving the fallout. Can't wait.
Have you got your popcorn ready for tomorrow, Rebecca?
I've got my popcorn ready. Loadsome characters, both of them.
Okay, Rebecca?
Well, I'm in this select committee tomorrow asking...
Are you?
Dominic the questions, yeah. So, I mean, it's not a great choice between Dominic Cummings or Boris Johnson on a question of truthfulness, but I hope that Dominic is truthful tomorrow, and I suspect he will be, because if his Twitter threads are anything to go by, there's a lot of information going to be coming out in that select committee, all the way from the government pursuing the herd immunity strategy at the start, before we imposed the first lockdown, all the way through to reports that were provided by Public Health England, the Nimbus report, which projected hundreds of thousands of deaths at the same time as demanding that schools stayed open. So it's going to be an interesting session. Well, I can't say what I'm going to ask yet, though, apart from it's going to be amazing.
I've got a question you could ask him. Mr. Cummings, you tweeted 53 tweets over the weekend. It's almost as if you weren't there, that you weren't the Prime Minister's strategic advisor. Do you bear no responsibility for any of the decisions that you were made because you were effectively Deputy Prime Minister? How about that, Rebecca?
That's a good question. I might ask that, Ian. You never know.
I should be watching. Right, final. I would come back to you, Chris, but we're running over time, and I just want to get this final text question in. But thank you for your question. Boris Johnson and Carrie Symonds reportedly had £27,000 worth of luxury food delivered to 10 Downing Street. Which takeaway would you spend £27,000 on? Well, you are all fine figures of human beings. I'm sure you don't do junk food. Yasmin, let's start with you for no particular reason.
Oh. I'm trying to get my head around this.
Because you are the antithesis of a junk food merchant, because you are a brilliant cook. I know that.
In food.
Well,
no taking food comes through my door.
That's a boring answer. Tobias Ellwood, you must have the odd takeaway.
I do occasionally, but I'm actually prone to sweet foods. I'd probably spend all money, as much money as I could on Haribos. I'm afraid I actually grew up not far from Harry Bustler, who was the German owner of the company. I didn't realise this until much later, but he used to give them out when I was a very young boy and to all the kids in the village. And I've become addicted to them ever since.
Simon Heffer, I can imagine you binging on takeaway venison.
Well, I tell you what, actually, I'd spend about £3 on a Marks and Spencer's egg and bacon sandwich because they're delicious. And I'd spend the other £26,997 on a really good bottle of brandy to wash it down.
Rebecca?
Well, my all-time favourite food is sweet and sour chicken, fried rice, curry sauce and chips from Barton Oriental in Salford. It's the big
free advert for them. Thank you so much for joining us all, Yasmin Alibhai-Brown, Rebecca Long-Bailey, Simon Heffer and Tobias Ellwood. Remember, you can catch up on the programme on the Cross Question podcast 3 times a week now. In a moment, we're going to look at the first anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. Denise Headley will be joining me. We'll be taking your calls and asking what progress has been made on race relations over the last 12 months. It's 9:03.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, Downing Street says COVID guidance about travel and socialising in areas of England with high levels of the